Hello. I hope everybody's looking forward to an hour or so of world building. Um, the plan tonight is to talk about reagents. I was surprised when the vote won. I didn't expect it to be quite that popular a topic, but I am ready to discuss it and raring to go. Um, I actually did a chunk of research around alchemy and so on because I decided to include it in my latest whip. And but as a more mundane thing than as a magical thing. So an actual sort of like chemistry based alchemy rather than one with roots in magic. Hey Carrie, how you doing? Good to see you. So, the way I thought we could discuss reagents tonight is to first sort of discuss broadly what they are, and then historically what they've represented in our world and where the kind of concept of reagents comes from in alchemy and in the kind of magic that our various cultures have believed in the past, and then take that forward and talk about its application in fantasy and how it can really kind of supercharge a magic system and a plot line and a culture. So we're going to, cover the whole kind of gamut of what a reagent is. First, though, let's just, upfront state like a reagent. What is it for real? If we think about like what does it mean to call something a reagent? So today, when we talk about a reagent in chemistry, what we mean is that it is a thing that reacts, okay? But importantly, it's a thing that reacts without being used up. That's a reactant. I speak under massive correction, okay? Because I am not a chemist. As with everything, I am a gifted amateur. The only point on which I will ever speak with absolute authority is computer science and mathematics. The rest of it, I'm all just a gifted amateur. So, and sometimes not even that gifted. Sometimes I'm a slow amateur. So, chemistry, as far as I understand, a reagent reacts but is not used up. Yeah, but that is the meaning of what it is now in chemistry. That's not what it was back in in historical context. So let's talk a little bit about historical reagents and kind of the concept of alchemy. So, in classical alchemy, practitioners believed that certain materials held this extraordinary transformative powers. And that's why, like medieval alchemists, toiled in their laboratories where they mixed metals and herbs and strange additives in the hopes of achieving kind of miraculous cures. And everything that went into those mixtures were called reagents. And their ultimate kind of reagent output of this, the thing that they all sought to achieve was, of course, the philosopher's stone, which was a substance that would turn lead into gold and brew the elixir of life, which would, which would make the drinker immortal. And as effectively, this would fundamentally alter life, right? Because it would give whoever owned it infinite money, infinite wealth, and infinite life, right? It's a reshape the world kind of substance. But there were plenty of kind of more commonplace reagents that were discovered and were used and so on. I'm reminded of the story of, oi, I can't remember his name right now, but there was a German dude who was locked up in a tower because he claimed that he could, in fact, change lead into gold. And so one of the German kings kind of locked him up. But actually, what he wanted from the guy, because the guy also claimed to be able to forge porcelain, to create porcelain. and that was what he actually wanted. And by hook and crook and happenstance, the guy actually did figure out how to make not porcelain, not China's porcelain, but Europe, what's called European paste porcelain, which is also white, but is a different process of creation. And that was also a process of alchemy and reagents. Anyway, sorry, got a little bit sidetracked there. I love that story of like the dude in the tower. Anyway, the historical alchemists had they cataloged the world in terms of like it had the elements, the 5 elements, which were air, water, earth, fire, and space. Okay, so space was kind of this catch-all term. And then you mix these to create various reagents like sulfur and mercury and salt and so on, which have fundamental properties of combustion, fluidity, and solidity, right? And this was your kind of base reagents. Okay, is everybody with me still? Um, yeah, bro absolutely faked it till he made it so hard he actually pulled through on that paste porcelain. It's the most awesome story. It's really it's hysterically funny. Um, it didn't end well for him, you know, because these stories never end well for anyone except the king. But it is an awesome story nonetheless. That's the one. Johann Friedrich Botger. Botger is exactly the one. Thank you, Jenny, come lately. Very, very in time there. Um, so yeah, so you know, it's a really fun story, a bit of historical lore about like how um, porcelain, you know, white paste porcelain came to be made. And I mean, you got to understand, like we take this stuff for granted now, right? We have it in our basins, and we, you know, all of us have a sink in our house and all the rest of that. But back then, like before industrialization, before automation, these things were worth a fortune, right? Anything that had to be made was so valuable because everything took time and effort and human input, you know. And like they called porcelain white gold at one point because it was so awesome, this white ceramic that you could serve food on, you know, and all the kings and the lords and so on, they wanted this. So I think it's very easy for us to lose track sometimes of how valuable material goods were pre-industrialization, pre-automation. You know, we have so much material wealth. Like a medieval king would walk into my house and think that I am, you know, rich as Croesus with the kind of material wealth that we have, and that's just because we have so much automation. Anyway, sorry, that's a different topic for a different time. It's just something to bear in mind when you're world building. It's like pre-automation, material goods are complicated because it requires so much labor input, and you know, whoever inputs that labor needs to be fed in some way. Like um so history of alchemy. All right, let's talk about kind of literary inventions around alchemy. So you know that Macbeth, the line that everybody remembers about the witches is double, double toil and trouble. But if you look up the rest of that whole thing that they say in there, it's actually a very kind of detailed list of all these gruesome items. You know, at one point they talk about scale of dragon, tooth of wolf, witch's mummy, maw and gulf of the ravened salt sea shark, root of hemlock digged in the dark. And then, of course, eye of Newton, toe of frog, and so on. Basically, the point of all of that was that magic came not necessarily from inside someone and not necessarily from anything demonic. Magic came from these items that were added and combined in a specific way, and together they kind of joined up into a singular magic force. Right, so that's the essence of like what an alchemical reagent is. It is something that creates magic, okay, by being blended together, by kind of, hooking up and uh, with the other agents and coming out of this as like a magical substance. So that is our, and I mean, you can look back even at the Greeks, like Medea sorcery works in the same way. It's all around like items, and not just items, also it's in the way that you combine items. So you have to, like the witches had the hemlock that they had to dig in the dark of the night, and then they can combine it, and only then does it become magical, right? Shakespeare's witches and so on. And that was kind of the thing with alchemy, was it had to be the base components had to be gathered in the right way, and then they had to be transformed into reagents in the right way. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later on when we talk about alchemical labs and the role that they can play in your magic system. Okay, so that's kind of our history of alchemy and how alchemy has been used in kind of historical fiction and mythology. Now, let's talk about where would reagents come from in your world. So if we look at the big fantasy worlds that have implemented a kind of reagent lore, the answer is pretty much they come from everywhere. Okay? Anywhere is possible. Mistborn is the biggest one, right? Where you have a reagent in the form of metals. And these metals are the source of your magic. Now, in Mistborn, the mage directly consumes the metals most of the time, but you can, that isn't necessarily, you can also go with like a combination, you could make alloys and so on and so forth. You could have reagents made of flora, so magical plants that grow in remote locations and so on. You could also have reagents of animal origin, like dragon's blood, phoenix feathers, horn of a unicorn, and so on. Um, and those are all kind of your physical world items, right? So items you can find in the world. But you can also go like sideways and have like um, harnessing elemental energy or capturing sunshine in a handkerchief or so on. One of the things that I really love about the Dresden magic system, the Dresden Files magic system, is the way that Dresden makes potions. It's quite beautiful in its way. I wish it featured more in the books, but anyway. So, how potions work is he puts in symbolic items into the brew, into the potion's brew, to represent kind of different aspects of the world. So at one point he's brewing a magic potion, and like the items that he puts in his skull, which is Bob's skull, which is it's an air elemental that gives him advice. And so the air elemental tells him, put in a diamond into the love potion. That's what girls want. That's what gives the love potion its oomph. And Dresden's like, dude, I don't have a diamond. I'm a broke freaking wizard. Where am I going to find a diamond? And so Bob's like, well, if you want just a sleazy potion, you can just cut up a 50 and that'll have more or less the same effect. And so, like in the Dresden world, it's not so much the specific items as the intent and the symbology behind the items that combine to create the reagent in the mixture. Um, so you could go that route as well. You can have your reagents not related per se to their actual physical properties, but to their symbolic properties, what they mean for a given culture. And then, of course, different cultures will have different reactions to the same ingredients, the same physical ingredients, because they mean different things in different cultures. Right. I mean, obviously, not all things mean different things in different cultures, but there are many kind of like substances and foods and so on that are different from culture to culture that would have a different impact on your reagents. Um, and I think that to me lies at one of the hearts of using reagents in your magic system. You want more than just, harvest products. You want more than just like, I go to the marketplace and I buy an egg, and that egg is what I use in my magic system, right? Either there must be something that they have to do, so they gather rare herbs at certain times, or like Geralt of Rivia gathering, monster parts from deadly creatures to brew his potions. And that makes gathering the reagents an adventure in itself, and it provides a natural limitation to your magic system. Why doesn't everybody just, drink this potion and feel great all the time? Well, because it's hard to get the right ingredients, you know. Um, and and that, of course, also um, brings up a great question of impact in the world. Right? So let's say that there's a reagent that gives you long life, but the plant that it's gathered from is actually the kind of keystone species of the world. It gives magic to the world. So taking too much of this plant can rob the surrounding land of its vitality. And this then gives you a very interesting angle to explore in terms of like the ecological impact of such use. And that's one of the things that happened in Dark Sun, um, where you had careless magic that drew energy from living things, which led to barren deserts. Um, so you can play with those kinds of concepts as well with reagents. Like, is it a limited supply, and how is that limited supply then ameliorated? Okay, so that is the base components of reagents and gathering it. Um, is everyone with me? Do you have any questions before I talk about alchemical labs and how they can add to your magic system and make your magic really cool? Um, Elden Ring, at least by community theory, fair enough, takes a lot from alchemy, including but not limited to the main god. I mean, Elden Ring, yes, does take a lot from alchemy. So I'll admit that I have not finished the game. I am not that big a gamer, and Elden Ring is, famously horrifyingly hard. So, but I really enjoyed the lore of the game in the playing of it. And since it was, the lore was written by Martin, and Martin is famously a huge lover of history. Um, I would not, it would not surprise me at all if he drew very directly on alchemy. Um, Yeah, you could also have reagents that expire quickly, as Necromancer James says. Like if your reagent is a cut flower, for example, it might only be active while it is, still kind of breathing in the air. Once it withers, once it's dried, that's too late, you know. So it expires. So if your reagents is formed of kind of living materials, it's very easy to have an expiration date on them. You could even have potions that expire, a best before date on your final elixirs and so on. So there's a lot, and the nice thing about using reagents in this way in your magic system is that, as I say, it creates a very natural limit that kind of holds your magic system back from becoming overpowering. And if you need to take magic away from your players, your protagonists, your whatever you're working with, you can very easily do that by just limiting their reagents. And that then gives you a means to force the story into a direction of finding a solution that is not magic, if that's something you're looking for. So, it's a powerful part of your tool bag, making magic not dependent on like an internal thing that the mage has, but an external thing that they need to acquire. Um, okay, let's talk about labs. So we've gone out in the middle of the night and poached an egg from the woods in the darkness, because that's the only way you can get a poached egg. And we have our raw reagents. Now, how do we actually mix them? So classic alchemical text describes stages like calcination, burning to ash, distillation, purifying through vapor, and coagulation, crystallizing essences. So you can do the same in your fantasy lab and add additional twists, right? So this is where you can bring in more magical elements if you want. Okay, so you can have your classic kind of alchemical approach where you say, okay, you've got to take the feather, you have to burn the feather to ash. Then you have to mix those ashes with a solution of mercury salts, and then you have to distill the vapors, or you have to coagulate the substance into a crystal. And that then gives you your final form, this crystal that people can ingest, and it makes them stronger. Or I created these little thingies in my world in Kisangi, where they make fire when on contact with air, right? So they're called little fire pellets. So basically they're kept in wax paper to prevent them from, lighting. And then when they're opened up, the little crystalline substance takes air, and it is a coagulated salt solution, right? Alchemical salt solution. But you can go beyond, it's kind of the mixing of substances and the creation of kind of these magical items. You could go into like, okay, now the mage has to add a little bit of power to this solution of mercury salts, and then it needs to crystallize, and that little bit of power is kind of the extra ingredient. That means that not everyone can mix up these alchemical reagents from the base components, because you still need a bit of magic to make the whole solution work. Right, so those are kind of the extra aspects that you can add to a mage, to using magic in this way. So I hope that all makes sense. But one of the interesting things about this approach is that you can take two different approaches here. You can either say that a recipe has to be done very much as it is done, right? There is one correct way to do a recipe. You do it this way, and out pops a magic substance. Or you could say it is roughly required to be done this way, but there is space for people to do little improvements. So you could have different alchemists produce the same kind of substance in slightly different ways and argue over whether it's better to crush the roots or cut the roots, whether it's better to um, add the substance first and then let it coagulate, or to coagulate it and then to roll it in the salts afterwards, right? Because the effect might be the same, but with subtle differences. And that can also create plot lines where you have different artisans arguing over what is the right way, what is the best way to create these magical compounds from the reagents by using different techniques. And this can result in different guilds, which can give you different guild feuds, which can give you, conflict and drama that you can pull on in order to create story. Also very relevant if you're running a campaign, because different guild factions can hire adventurers to steal the other guild's recipe to try and figure out what they've done different and whether that works better or worse. So working with these kind of recipes within a laboratory can create a hella interesting approach to creating alchemical reagents, um, in terms of whether it has to be done this way, whether it can be done slightly different ways, whether these ingredients are all symbolic the way they are in Dresden Files, or whether there is some grounding in chemistry. So exactly. Exactly, Necromancer Jam, like baking cookies. Small changes still make the cookie, but they can taste wildly different. And, and that then makes it a very interesting approach to creating your alchemical substances, in your different kind of guilds and cultures and so on. Okay. Um, and then, of course, you want to consider things like, how much of a difference does it make? How badly can that cookie turn out, right? Let's say you have a very inexperienced alchemist and they mix completely the wrong reagents first. And does that cause an explosion? Does it burn out the lab? Does it create a poisonous final substance? There can be all kinds of consequences for inexperience in using reagents for somebody to then go and meddle with things they do not know. And that can create a very interesting storyline in and of itself, like what happens to that person afterwards. How do they cope with that? Do they learn new things? And it also creates training opportunities within your world. Like, how do people then get trained in using these reagents correctly? What is the means for gaining um, knowledge of how to mix reagents and how to use alchemy in your world? So it's a very interesting approach to building up your magic system through training, is to use reagents in your magic system, because there isn't just snap your fingers, practice a bit with magic, and off you go. The most simplistic magic system I've ever seen is David Eddings's Will and the Word in the Bulgariad, and that literally is just, like I say the word, I do the thing, and the thing happens. Like, that's it. Um, but the problem with that kind of magic system is you have to severely limit it. So he limited it, like I don't know, there's like 8 people in his whole world that can use this magic system, and they're all stupid, ridiculously, completely overpowered. And that is an approach. It's a valid approach, but a more interesting approach is to kind of put other limits into your magic systems. And reagents, as we've been discussing all now, have got plenty. They've got such beautiful limits, because it's not only like how many of them there are, whether they expire, do you have the right ones and all of that, but there's also you have to be taught how to use them. And that puts a burden of training on mages, which creates additional conflicts, additional threads of drama you can draw on, and it creates relationships, right? Because if your main protagonists can use magic, your main character, that means somebody has taught him. Who taught him? How does he feel about that person now? Is he still like beholden to them in some way? Or is he, is he angry with them? Has he fled their tutelage? Like there's all kinds of interesting ways you can play with that kind of like master apprentice dynamic in a magic system with reagents involved in its creation. Okay. So we've spoken a chunk about the kind of how reagents affect society. Economically, of course, you know, um, if you think of Stormlight Archive, Stormlight, which is effectively a reagent, serves as money and the fuel for supernatural power, right? So um, reagents can drive your economy. You can have trade routes, you can have treaties, you can have wars. You can build reagents into your world setup of your societies. Because if they fuel magic and magic is powerful, people are going to need ways for those reagents to cycle through. And then, I mean, they can directly impact political power. If we look at Sanderson again in Mistborn, the Lord Ruler, right, of the final empire controls the empire by controlling access to Atium. Okay. He very, very tightly controls the supply and um, of Atium, and burning Atium makes a Mistborn nearly unbeatable in combat, right? But because the Lord Ruler controls it, he controls the empire. So, in the case of the final empire in Mistborn, this a reagent very directly translates into straight political power. I mean, in our world, it can have the same kind of impact as oil or uranium or things like that. And you can set up political plots around this, like, you know, you have the dwarven king marry the human king so that the dwarves will trade much needed reagents with the human kingdom in order to for them to forge some of these alchemical elements. So you can really build it into your politics, your economics, your whole society setup. And of course, in a kind of campaign side, you can create a whole adventures where people are searching for specific reagents, your in order to achieve some kind of spell. They can even be racing against the clock, like there's a big kind of sky thing coming, a comet or whatever, and it's bringing a terrible omen, and the walls around the kingdom's going to collapse or whatever the case may be. And they have to find all of the correct reagents to create this massive ritual in order to defend against this coming darkness or whatever the case is. So yeah, if failure is common, you've got a really big problem. So yeah, exactly. Like an alchemist working with dead monster insights, like that is very much like a very good reagent, because it's a difficult to obtain thing. In order to get it, you have to risk your life in order to kill this monster to get the items and so on. So when you're setting up your kind of reagents and so on, don't stop with your magic system. Think about how these reagents affect your culture. Like, what is the impact on your economy? What is the impact on your politics? What is the impact on, the needs of people? How does this fit into Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Where does it go? Because it will have a fundamental impact on the shape of your world if these reagents are actually like powerful, like they're used and they have real effects. The other thing to bear in mind is that reagents can evolve over time. So if we think back now to what I was saying about, like, porcelain and so on, and how cheaply and easily porcelain's available to us now. I mean, this mug that I've got here, I drank hot chocolate. I think it was made out of, ceramics, with glazes and so on. So why is that no longer valuable? It's no longer, well, obviously it's not valueless, but it's no longer as valuable. And it's no longer as valuable because of industrialization. But in a world with reagents as the heart of your magic system, you can absolutely have an industrial revolution equivalent, right? You can take your reagent creation and you can say, okay, but what if it could be automated? What if people could literally take the input of your flowers or whatever, and they can automate the creation of light? Light is a big one. If you have reliable light so that people don't have to depend on firelight after dark, you've massively increased the general productivity of your society. Or what if what if you can automate the creation of power so that people can have powered looms and create, and automate sort of weaving and stuff like that, those very labor intensive tasks. You can have that kind of industrial revolution with your reagents, and then you get into very interesting territory, because now, how much reagents do you now need? Think of how much more input we need into our material goods than we did 300 or 400 years ago. They needed, sure, the food to support a human remained the same, but the amount of, like, cotton and wool and all of that stuff has massively increased because we use much more clothes than we used to, right? People used to wear a shirt for like a year. They'd have like 2 or 3 shirts, and they'd wear them for a whole year, right? Getting a new shirt was a big deal because it was expensive. Um, so when you start needing reagents at kind of an industrial scale, where does that base component come from? Do people start farming reagents? Is there an ecological impact? Is there a creation of a whole new class of people who just create this reagent? Like, there's all kinds of very, very interesting societal impacts at the point where you take your reagents and you evolve them up and move them into the industrial scale. And you can do that with a magic system that has reagents. That's what Sanderson did with Mistborn, with I think the second era. I'll admit I haven't read all the books. Somebody asked me once if Sanderson's my favorite author, and I had to explain, no, he's not, but he is my favorite world builder. And there is somewhat of a difference. like I'm not that bananas about his actual, like, writing, but I love his worlds. I will read world building notes by Sanderson with pleasure, because they're lovely worlds. Um, let me go on. Let me talk about something else before I get myself in trouble. Okay, so those are those are my kind of main points around using reagents is one, think about where they come from. Are they a natural substance? Are they a magical substance? Is it a flower? Is it clay? What is kind of the thing here? How is it gathered, right? Is there a special way to mine it, to cut it, to harvest it, and so on? How is it crafted, right? So once you have the raw ingredients, what then? Do you put it together in a lab? Do you have to do it in a specific way? Is there a symbolic aspect to it? Do you need to add magic to it? Or do you just slap the ingredients together and anyone can do it if they know the techniques? And how are people trained in these techniques? How do people gain this knowledge? And then how does it affect your society from your from an economic, political, and a cultural perspective? What is the impact of these reagents in your societal life? And then lastly, how do you evolve your reagents? What is the future of your reagents? Are you looking at some kind of industrial revolution of magic fueled by reagents, and what is the impact on your world and your society of such an action? Okay, and those are my 5 ways in which, alchemy can supercharge your magic system. So, questions, thoughts, ideas, hit me with anything, anything at all. Um, I will say that in Sangwheel, I went with almost normal like almost normal chemistry. Not fully, obviously, like because sometimes you want a little bit more than what chemistry can give per se. Um, and sometimes you have things that you want to do that chemistry can't do without more advanced physics. Like, for example, let's say you want aluminium. Now, there's ways to get aluminium without electricity, but it's really hard. But once you have electricity, aluminium's dirt cheap, right? For my American audience, I think it's aluminum. I think you pronounce it aluminum. Um, and so if I want aluminum as a metal in my world, then I need to either have my alchemist be able to control electricity, which I am so not ready for. I'm not ready for electricity in my world. So if I don't want that, then I need a different kind of salt that doesn't necessarily exist in our world that can kind of do the same thing as electricity can for me and produce aluminum out of a solution of some kind, like coagulated. And so, you can do that as well, where the reagents serve kind of the purpose of chemistry in our world. And your alchemists are chemists, not necessarily mages. And that provides a very interesting side, different aspects. So I've got mages, I've got actual mages in my world. And then I have chemistry. And the two are going to come into conflict to some extent. And that creates a very interesting setup of like the power of the individual as represented by a mage who can channel magic, and the power of a kind of democratized power of if you mix these things up, you can create a potion or a gun or you can create a thing that a normal person can use, and with it they can oppose a mage. And that creates a very interesting set of societal conflicts that creates a very kind of dynamic world that you can play with, and a lot of threads to pull on, and think about how that kind of would turn out, and how you want it to turn out in your story, and how you can make it turn out. So there's a lot you can do with alchemical reagents, both in terms of a magic system and in terms of using it as chemistry, and in terms of just adding some flavor to your world. You know, um, yeah. I am massively in favor of reagents. Most of my magics, except for Sangwill's magic system is very, very simple, but there's a very specific reason for that. I wanted a fairly simple magic system there because I wanted it limited by how much are you willing to pay for the magic. Because that's the thing with Sangwill, is you can draw on the sources of power of magic in the world, but it costs you. You either then are filled with a lust for murder or a lust for life, and both of them have bad consequences either way. But my other magic systems tend to lean heavily on reagents because I really do like them as like a limitation. How can you use reagents to build a marketplace, like secondary, tertiary job markets? Okay, so first, it can create a marketplace for the raw items, right? So let's say you have alchemical reagents that are built up out of mandrake roots that have to be dug at night. And you also need sulfuric salts. So somebody needs to, like, I don't know, trek off to a volcano or a geyser or something and gather water that's been infused with sulfur. And you also need eggs of some kind of bird, that nests on a cliff. Okay, cool. So your first is your raw ingredients, right? So there's got to be people who go and dig mandrake roots in the middle of the night, when the stars are right and the moon shines or whatever. They're there with their little trowels digging for mandrake roots. And there's people going off to the cliffs to go gather the bird eggs, and there's people who are, gathering the geyser water, right? So there's people going into like the badlands to gather geyser water. Okay, so that gives you your first primary marketplace for primary goods. Now, you have to process these things. So let's say that the geyser water has to be coagulated into a crystal. Okay, so it has to be basically dehydrated of water and dehydrated into like a crystalline substance. So now there has to be somebody with like an alembic and a little Bunsen burner type equivalent, some sort of brazier that creates heat that can coagulate the substance down to sulfur, or freeze it, or however they do their coagulation. And maybe the egg has to be aged, and so somebody has to store the egg somewhere for it to be aged. And maybe the mandrake root has to be, it has to be cooked, and then the fumes of it has to be has to be pushed through a glass tube so that it's kind of like, that the fumes are made pure and so on. And that creates your secondary inputs. Okay, so now you've got all your secondary reagent inputs and people who've worked on it. And then finally, this stuff is then combined into your actual product. So you can create that whole kind of setup of like having, so you've got people who are gathering the prime ingredients, the mandrake root and the eggs and the whatever, and then they bring them together, they make the secondary, and then they make the third. I hope that answered your question, Aidan. Um, I completely agree, Kaylee. Plastic wrapped mandrake roots are the worst. It just does not react the way that I want it to react when I am making my potion using dragon scales. Sorry you missed the first part, the Sid. But it will be available as play on demand. So, um, you will be able to catch the whole kind of preamble bit where I was setting out all of the original thoughts. So yeah. Um, um, yeah. So reagents reagent is such a broad term, right? It's basically anything that goes into an input. But the interesting thing about reagents is when you start combining them, when you have primary, secondary, and tertiary inputs that give you a final magical product. And you start thinking about things like logistics, like how do those items move around within your economies? Like how does it get from city to city? This city might only have this kind of flour. So how do they send that flour elsewhere and get the gems that they need in order to create additional reagents and so on? Freeze-dried mandrake roots are the way to go. I agree. Um, how would you mix the idea of reagents and alchemy with something like blood magic? So there's two ways you can do that. I would either make blood an input, another reagent, right? So you could have, you've got all of these normal ingredients that you set up. So you've got your mandrake root, you've got your egg, you've got your sulfur water. I'm really leaning heavily on these three ingredients now. So you've got all three of those. But in order to make them active, you have to add life. And life is symbolized by blood. Yeah. So the alchemist either has to bleed into the thing or has to get somebody to bleed into it, because that is the sacrifice of life that is necessary to empower the reagents. So that's one way to incorporate magic directly, is to add it as like a fourth reagent, right? Or the second way that you could bring it in, so if it's not necessarily an ingredient, is you could use it in activation. So let's say you go through the whole alchemical process and you create kind of your final thing, you've got it. But then in order to use that thing, so on activation of that thing, you need blood magic or some other form of magic that then creates the activation of the final reagent. So that the final reagent is not just usable, it needs a jump start to make it more reusable. And that would then be blood. But I think adding blood as like a reagent method is probably your best bet. Could those processes cause alliances? Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's say that city A has got those cliffs where they can gather those eggs. City B has got geysers. Okay. Now you need both geysers and the cliffs in order to create your philosopher's stone alchemical, a reagent, your alchemical device. Okay, cool. Those cities aren't just going to give up those ingredients to each other. So what happens? Maybe they seal a marriage alliance, right? Maybe a princess of city A marries a prince of city B, and in their marriage they exchange gifts, and those gifts allow them to create some of these alchemical devices. Or maybe they establish a trade route. Maybe they have this like massive alliance where they discuss how much are they allowed to trade and how much do they keep back for the city, and there's this whole like authorized merchants who can move these reagents between the two cities. So 100% treaties and alliances all the way when you have those kinds of magical items. Um, what are some of the effects for potions that would be very useful in ancient times that we haven't thought much about? Um, so, so things that would be actually, your comment made me think of one of the curses that I read about in this whole process. The Greeks, man. The, the Greeks were so weird. Um, they had as an alchemical reagent. I kid you not, it's grim. I'm sorry, it's really grim, but I have to share it with you because it was just too funny. They had as an alchemical reagent a woman, a girl, a woman's first menstrual blood. And if you go and spread that around the house of your enemy, you could call a curse down on your enemy, and it's just like I was like, "That is so grim. That is so horrifyingly grim." Anyway, it's not the worst. I mean, I've read worse, I've yeah, there's terrible reagent ingredients, but I was like, "Damn, that's grim." Yeah, my cat was like that. It's very grim. Um, so, to get back to potions that would be useful. Clean water is very, very critical, okay? If you can reliably clean water, and not have kind of diseases and sewers and so on, you are on a good wicket. Oh, come here, my baby. Um, and, um, do you wanna go up there? Where do you wanna be, my love? How about on the desk? You don't know? Okay. Um, so, clean water, clean food. Um, sewage. If you can clean sewage, you're doing great. Um, anything basically that can help you prevent germ spread. Like, I think that one of and cleaning wounds. Oh my goodness, cleaning wounds. I think that one of the things that people miss when they look back at the past is how much people died from what is now super preventable diseases. And I'm not just talking about like antibiotics or vaccines or any of those kinds of more modern day things that we've invented, right? Just keeping wounds clean was hard, right? People used to use vinegar and honey, which are good for keeping wounds clean, and I'm not saying they're not. We still use honey in some medical applications because honey is a super fluid. It's super saturated. So bacteria dies in it, right? So if you're ever anywhere and all you have is honey and you're wounded, slap the honey on the wound and it'll be fine. Or it'll be reasonably fine because it's a natural antibacterial. But it is really, really hard to kill like very, very simple things like that bacteria. People's wounds went bad all the time. They died from it. Blood loss. If you can stem blood loss with a potion, oh my goodness. Um, you know, like one of the primary reasons women died in childbirth so much before the modern age was blood loss. Right? Because if something happened, if something bad happened during the birth, and unfortunately, giving birth is risky because our heads are quite big for the kind of exit, and so there can be tearing. right? There can be tearing of the uterus and so on, and that causes immense bleeding, and it can cause internal bleeding. And so if something went wrong at birth, which often happened, what killed the woman was not that the birth, it wasn't giving birth, it was the immense blood loss caused by something that went wrong. So if you can restore blood, you're golden. Golden. Yeah, exactly. Rather than a healing potion, make some Neosporin. Man, I'm telling you, you would solve so many problems with Neosporin, because that is that is a much, much bigger problem than one thinks of. In a setting with blood magic, you would you would 100% have a market for pre-bottled or living things capable of bleeding. Yeah, I can see all kinds of like weirdness with a like a blood magic, like a vampire kind of system. You have people who sell their blood, people who sell their bleeding, like animals that have been bred to overproduce blood cells so that they can be bled, all kinds of crazy stuff. Given enough incentives, humans are incredibly capable of, over a long enough time, doing the weirdest crap. um, you can do that too, Sid. You can have, wars over reagents. You can have cities going to war, making alliances against each other, and so on. So, yeah, you can go bananas. Exactly, yeah. Magic anticoagulants is stuff that stops the bleeding. If you can stop bleeding, you go a long way to solving a lot of deaths, because that was one of the hardest things to do, is to stop the bleeding, and to stop the bleeding without introducing dirt into the wounds. Because remember, like, we use a bandage and we throw it away, right? Because we have bandages everywhere. I mean, we think nothing of throwing a bandage away. But that was not the case when bandages were hard to make and expensive. You've got to always bring it back to how hard is it to make the material component. The material component is bandages. Bandages is made of cloth. Cloth means threads. Pre-industrialization, threads means some human sat in front of a spinning wheel and spun until there was sufficient thread to actually make this bandage. Them's a lot of hours. um, okay, all micro, sure, but yes, microorganisms do more than just make us sick. They've got like we have them living inside us doing all kinds of stuff, like digesting our food. um and keeping our guts healthy and so on. um yeah, so that was reagents. That was reagents, and the things you can do with them, the impact they have on your society, um, and and how you can use them in basically any magic system. Bear in mind, you can still keep your kind of, whatever magic you want to keep, um, and still have reagents. That was basically the original D&D magic system, where you had like material components and somatic components and all that stuff. It didn't work very well in the game, but 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 you had your magic system, but you still had these kind of material components that could be combined in different ways to create the magical element, and it just adds it adds a part to the magic that gives you a means to take the magic away, which is always good, right? If you have a means to limit magic, it means that if your plot demands it, you can strip your protagonist of magic. And that creates a piece of conflict that then requires a different plot solution. So that's one thing. The second thing is that it introduces a natural limitation to how much magic you can have in your world, because creating magic requires these additional components that have to be paid for, traded for, created, and so on. So that is a massive advantage of introducing reagents, whether you use them in an alchemical sense or in a magical sense, or whatever way you use them in, is those two big things that they do for you. And then, of course, the impact on society and so on that we've spoken about. And I think that is more or less my story. I hope that you guys have enjoyed the session. I do, by the way, try to keep the live streams as such reasonably, like, you know, ad free and so on. So I hope nobody was interrupted. I do try and like tell YouTube not to put in ads. So I hope you guys weren't interrupted with mid-roll ads and stuff like that. Yes. I am so with you, Carson. I'm like, the D&D kingdoms clearly have like just piles of bat guano, because if there's war, they just deploy like whole like squads of mages who've just got bat guano on the move, you know? Yeah. And other than that, guys, thank you so much for spending an hour of your weekend with me. I, as I always did, very much enjoyed the live stream. And I will catch you again next month. And last thing. Next week, Wednesday, Worldbuilding Blueprints closes. So Worldbuilding Blueprints is my book that I wrote. It is reasonably epic. I'm going to put a link in chat. I will share the let me quickly share my screen and I'll show you guys. Okay, so this is sort of what the book looks like. It's got like exercises and all kinds of things in it. So if we look at add fantasy, there's like a whole bit in magic systems. Actually, let's start with crafting the arcane. So all of the exercises are in green blocks like this. Then there's purple blocks for like examples. There's some pictures and so on. None of the art in here is AI generated. And then it's got all of these worksheets for like, what is your source of magic, cost of magic, what can be done, magical effects, consumable magic items, permanent magic items, all of these kinds of aspects, and how people become a mage and so on. And I love these like big spreads as well. That's, where the art's over 2 pages. And so this is what the book looks like. And you can get the book in full color hardback. You can get it in, you can get it in a, paperback format, which is black and white only. It doesn't have the full color, so bear that in mind. And it's a little bit different in its layout because of that. or you can get it as a PDF, which would be this PDF. So all of those are available on the Kickstarter. And if you back it on Kickstarter, you'll also get an example, a fully worked out example using the worksheets in the book, and videos of me explaining how I made the decisions that I made in the example and how I kind of worked my way through the book. So all of that's available on the Kickstarter. And then once the Kickstarter's done and delivered and everything has been served, you'll be able to buy the book from my website and from most book retailers. So that is my that is my pitch for World Building Blueprints, and that is open until Wednesday. It has been fully successfully funded, by the way, so it's not a case of like funding it, but the late pledges closes on Wednesday. I do think it came out reasonably epic. Like I think it came out really pretty. I'm actually quite proud of it. Like, I'll show you some of my like favorite spreads in it. There's this one with like creating cultures. Every chapter ends with like a YouTube resources. So if you click on the URL or you follow the QR code, then it opens a playlist with like all of the videos related to the chapter curated from my back catalog. So like this, I think it looks good. And then you get the full cultural framework here, and so on. And there's like a place you can download the infographic, and it breaks down like the whole culture, the ideology, folkways and your norms, and just stuff that I think's cool. And like this art was completely custom for the book. This was custom commissioned for this book. So, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I think the layout came out very well. And I actually, the reason why I'm so freaking proud of it is because I did the layout myself. I tried to outsource it, but the person that I tried to outsource it to didn't quite understand what I meant, and I didn't like the kind of return that they gave me. So I ended up like buying a book layout, a piece of software called Affinity, and using that. And so I did all the layout the layout myself. So there's a lot of blood, sweat, and learning that went into doing the layout. So yeah, I hope it looks good. And with that, I will leave you guys. I hope that you have an amazing weekend, and I will see you next month. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you for being here. I do very, very much appreciate my community, and I think that you guys are awesome.